Ruth Ann Calloway's knees hit the dirt before the first cut came. She didn't scream. She'd learned that screaming only made Martha Caldwell press harder. The shears bit into her hair, thick auburn strands falling into the dust like something dying. The crowd watched. Nobody moved. Then a voice low and rough as drag chain over stone broke through the silence. "Take your hands off her." Silas Granger hadn't spoken to another soul in 8 years, but he was speaking now, and every man in that street heard the promise underneath his words. Subscribe to our channel and follow Ruth Ann's story to the very end. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from tonight. I want to see just how far this story travels. The shears were dull. That was the thing Ruth Ann kept thinking about while Martha Caldwell sawed through another lock of her hair. Not sharp, clean shears that would have done the job quick. Dull ones. Dull, like the kind you'd use on a sheep you didn't care about cutting. "Hold still," Martha said. Ruth Ann held still. She'd been holding still for 2 years. The sun beat down on the alley between the stable and the feed store, the kind of heat that pressed against the skull and made the air shimmer. A dozen people stood watching, maybe more. Women she recognized from the general store, men who tipped their hats to her on Sundays and now couldn't seem to find her eyes. "You think you're something, don't you?" Martha's voice carried, pitched for the crowd. "Think because you can read, because you can scratch out letters like some school teacher, that makes you better than my boy's family." The shears caught on a knot and yanked. Ruth Ann's head jerked sideways, and she bit the inside of her cheek hard enough to taste iron. "My Thomas is barely cold, and she's already got ideas," Martha announced, turning to the onlookers like a preacher delivering a sermon. "Found her writing a letter to a lawyer in Abilene asking about property rights, property that belongs to us." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ruth Ann stared at the dirt between her boots. The letter had been real. She'd written it by lamplight with hands that shook, every word chosen careful as a footstep on thin ice. She'd asked about widows' rights, about whether a dead man's family could keep a woman against her will. Martha had found it in the mattress straw. "Caleb," Martha said. Jonah and her younger son stepped forward, jaw set, holding a tin bucket. Ruth Ann knew what was in it before he tilted it. She'd seen him mix it that morning. Ash and axle grease stirred together into a paste black as sin. "Ma," Caleb said, low enough that only Ruth Ann and Martha could hear, "maybe we don't need to do the face part. Folks are watching." "That's the point," Martha said. "Folks are watching." Caleb hesitated. For one breath, Ruth Ann thought he might refuse, and his eyes met hers, and something flickered there. Not kindness, not really, but a cousin of it. Discomfort, maybe. The look of a man who knew the line between correction and cruelty, and could see his mother crossing it. Then he dipped his hand in the bucket. "Turn her," Martha ordered. Caleb's fingers, slick and black, pressed against Ruth Ann's jaw, forcing her face toward the crowd. The paste was cold, thick, smelling of char and grease. He smeared it across her left cheek, then her right, yet working fast, like he wanted it over with. Ruth Ann closed her eyes. Behind him she saw her father's face, the way he'd looked when he taught her to read by the window of his blacksmith shop. "Words are the only thing they can chew off you, Ruthie," he'd said. "A man can take your land, your money, your name, but he can't unread what you've read." They were trying to unread her. "Now open your eyes," Martha commanded. "You look at these people. You let them see what happens to a woman who forgets her place." Ruth Ann opened her eyes. The faces swam before her. Mrs. Dalton from the dry goods store, clutching her shawl like a shield. Old Briggs, the farrier, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his mouth a thin line. The Fletcher boy, no more than 12, staring with his jaw hanging open. And then at the edge of the crowd, a space where there hadn't been one before, a man she'd seen only from a distance, always alone, always moving through town like he was passing through, even though he'd lived here for years. Silas Granger. He stood with his weight settled, a busted hinge for the corral gate still in his left hand. His hat cast a shadow across the upper half of his face, but his jaw was set like stone. He didn't push through the crowd. He didn't need to. People moved for him the way water moves around a rock, not because it's afraid, but because it understands the rock isn't gonna move first. "I said, open your—" Martha started. "I heard what you said." Silas's voice cut across hers, low, unhurried, flat as a planed board. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. The alley had gone quiet the way a room goes quiet when somebody drops a hammer. Martha turned toward him, the shears still in her fist. "This is family business, Mr. Granger."
"Doesn't look like family business." He looked at Ruth Ann, not at the black paste on her face, not at the ragged patches where her hair had been cut. He looked at her eyes. "Looks like a woman being held down against her will in the middle of the street." "She's kin," Caleb said, straightening. "She married my brother." "Your brother's dead." The words landed like a stone dropped in still water. Caleb's face flushed dark, and his hand came away from Ruth Ann's jaw, fingers curling at his side. "You don't know anything about it," Caleb said. "I know what I'm looking at." Silas set the busted hinge down on a barrel near the wall, slow, deliberate, freeing both hands. "And what I'm looking at is finished." Martha laughed, a single sharp sound like a branch cracking. "Finished? Who do you think you are? You don't speak to anyone in this town for years, and now you've got opinions on my family?" "Don't need opinions." Silas stepped closer, not toward Martha, toward Ruth Ann. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "but pulling the skin tight, her scalp burned. Pulling the skin tight, her scalp burned where the shears had scraped. Her right arm ached where Caleb had gripped her." "I don't know you," she whispered. "No, ma'am, you don't." "Then why?" He was quiet for a beat. "Because nobody else is going to." Something cracked open inside her chest. Not warmth exactly, not hope, but the space where those things might grow. "Forward," furious. "You sit back down. Forward," furious. "You sit back down. We're not done." "Her name," Silas said without turning around, "is Ruth Ann. And yeah, you are done." Caleb moved then, fast and smooth, placing himself between Silas and his mother. His hand rested on the butt of his revolver, not drawing, just letting the weight of the gesture speak. "Mister," Caleb said, "I'm going to give you one chance to walk away from this." Silas's eyes dropped to Caleb's hand, then lifted again. "I appreciate the offer. I mean it. So do I." Silas hadn't raised his voice once, hadn't squared his shoulders or taken a fighting stance. He stood the way a fence post stands, rooted,
patient, unmoving. You want to draw on me over a woman you been smearing with axle grease? He said quietly. That's your choice, but I'd think about how that story sounds when people tell it later. Caleb's jaw tightened. Behind him, Martha hissed something sharp and angry, but the words didn't carry. She stole from us, Caleb said louder, turning toward the crowd. Clothes, silver, a quilt my mother made with her own hands. She was trying to run. Ruth Ann's voice came before she planted, rough, dry, but steady. I never took a thing from your house except the dress I'm wearing. Silence, heavy and thick. And your mother didn't make that quilt, Ruth Ann added. I did. Old Briggs pushed away from the wall. I seen that quilt on the wash line last winter, he said. Seen Ruth Ann stitching it herself on the porch. That pattern ain't your mother's work. Martha's face went pale, then red. You calling me a liar? I'm calling what I saw, Briggs said mildly, leaning back against the wall again. Silas didn't wait for the argument to continue, and he pulled the faded blue neckerchief from around his throat and held it out to Ruth Ann, not placing it on her, holding it out, letting her choose. She took it. Her fingers brushed his rough, calloused hand as she pressed the cloth to her face. The black grease smeared across the fabric. "You can't just take her," Martha snapped, and now her voice carried something Ruth Ann had not heard before. Fear. "She's ours." "The law says a widow's her own person," Silas said calmly, "unless you've got a paper that says different." Martha's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "I'll go to the sheriff," she snapped. "Good," Silas nodded. "Tell him what you were doing when I found you." Martha looked around the alley, searching for support. Mrs. Dalton stared at her shoes. The Fletcher boy turned away. Even the men lingering at the back suddenly found reason to drift elsewhere. "Come on, Ma," Caleb muttered finally. Ma jerked away from him, but turned toward the street anyway, the shears still clenched in her hand. Caleb followed her. The crowd parted, and just like that they were gone. Only the scattered pieces of Ruth Ann's hair remained in the dust. Silas looked back at her. "Can you walk?" "I think so. My horse is tied near the general store rail. It's not far." She took a step. Her ankle twisted on a loose stone. His hand appeared instantly beside her, not grabbing, just steady. Whoa! She found her balance. The sunlight hit her hard when they left the alley. Main Street stretched wide and bright in the heat. A dog slept beneath the saloon porch. 2 horses stood by the trough. Silas's gelding waited near the rail, a calm animal, the color of wet sand. "Where are you taking me?" Ruth Ann asked. "My place, 7 miles out." "Why?" He untied the reins. "Because they'll come looking for you in less than an hour, and there isn't a place in town that'll keep 'em out." She studied him. "I don't even know your name." "Silas Granger." "I'm Ruth Ann Calloway." "I know." He swung up onto the saddle and reached down. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. He pulled her up behind him with effortless strength. "You can hold on if you need to," he said. "I won't think anything of it." She kept her hands on the saddle. "Not yet." They rode out a dry creek at a slow walk. The town faded behind them. Dust, sage, open land stretching wide under the sun. After a mile her grip loosened. The neckerchief remained in her hand. "Mr. Granger," she said quietly. Silas, what happens when they come for me?" For a long moment he didn't answer.
The gelding's hooves beat a steady rhythm on the road. Then he spoke, quiet, even. Then I guess they'll find out I'm home." The gelding stopped at the porch rail, and Silas swung down first. Dust settled slowly around the horse's legs as the evening wind moved across the dry grass. He turned and held out his hand. Ruth Ann stared at it for a moment. Then she took it. Her boots touched the wooden step, and her knees nearly gave out. "Steady," Silas said. "I'm steady." She wasn't, but saying it made it closer to true. He pointed toward the bench beside the door. "Sit a minute. I'll bring water." She sat because her legs refused to hold her any longer. Her hands trembled in small, quick movements. She could not stop. The blue neckerchief was still twisted in her fingers, and the black stains already drying. Silas returned with a tin basin and a clean rag. The water sloshed against the rim. If this story stayed with you, if Ruth Ann's courage meant something to you, take a moment to like this video so others can find it too. Subscribe to the channel because there are many more stories like this waiting to be told. And don't forget to drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. And if you feel like someone else needs to hear it, share it. Sometimes a single story can change everything.